day was the first day of school for my twins. So they were starting like a nursery school in the same school building where Kimberly went. She was in 3rd grade. And we had already taken her to school, and Robert was home. We would be doing our kitchen. So all the guys from the firehouse were going to come over and redo the floor. And he freed up the whole day. So I got the kids ready, and we were sitting outside waiting for, like to leave to go take them to school, basically. And usually in the mornings, our children were, consumed with Nickelodeon TV, like the TV would always be on Nickelodeon. But I guess since he took the opportunity to turn on the news, Fox News, to see the opening bell of the market or whatever. And I was sitting outside on the stoop with the kids. They had their little gym suits on, and they were ready to go to school. And it was so beautiful outside. And she was, like I said, she was already gone to school. And he came outside and he said, a plane hit the World Trade Center. I said, really? And I went inside. And like I said, normally we would never have the news on. And we were watching. I'd been working at St. Vincent's Hospital right before that. I had just quit my job there. And I worked in public relations. And part of the history of St. Vincent's is they took in patients from a plane crash that hit the Empire State Building, I think in the 30s or something. So I said, it was probably a small plane crash. It happened to the Empire State Building. And we were watching it, and the kids were outside, so I had to go back outside. And he was still getting ready for the guys from the firehouse to come. And my neighbor came walking by and was like, you better be careful going, on the trains. They're going to shut down the trains under the Trade Center, like normal New York things, Like you'd be like, oh, the trains are going to be screwed up. There's a fire. And, basically in the beginning, it was just like, you were just thinking it was a fire and an accident. And so probably about 15 minutes later, he came out and he said, another plane just hit. I'm going to have to go. No, probably before that, he had said to me, maybe I should go in now, because he was doing that evening and he was covering on 37th Street in Manhattan. And I said, you know what, why don't you wait? Let's take the kids to school, because they're going to be tired. They're going to need relief. If everybody goes in now, being the wife of a fireman and a child of a fireman, I'm giving him advice of what to do. And I said, why don't we wait and, and see what happens. And then you go in after we take the boys to school. And that probably saved his life, because if he would have left it, earlier, he probably would have got there in time for the buildings to collapse. But he waited, and then it came across the bottom of the screen, all New York City firemen and cops to report to duty now. So he went upstairs. I vividly remember him going upstairs. And I'm like, what am I going to do with these kids? And then what am I going to do with her? She's in school. And so I'm just sitting there. Like, I just remember just sitting there, like, what the hell do you do? Like, he's leaving. And I'm sitting in a living room with, like, I have 4 small children, no kitchen, no floors, as a tiny itty bitty house, and 3-year-old twins, 1-year-old, and an 8-year-old. So, like, oh God, the floors aren't going to get done. You're still thinking on the fact that there's a fire. Now it's gotten a little worse, but it's still not the catastrophe that it was. And he leaves. I said, what are you going to do? He says, I'm going to walk up to Flatbush, and I'm going to find a way to get there from Flatbush. So he left, and we lived in Marine Park at the time, which is full of firemen and cops. It's a running joke that if your house goes on fire, there'll be 10 firemen out there with a garden hose to put it out. I mean, it's basically a lot of firemen, cops, teachers. So on his way up, he was walking up, he met up with several of the firemen, and they commandeered a bus. They took gear from a firehouse, and then they commandeered a bus, and they went over the bridge. So I'm left at the house with the 3 small children, and I don't know what to do. I'm like, what do we do? Like, do I go get her? at the time we don't know if it's we know it's a terrorist attack, but we don't know, are we safe? And like, do I go get her? Do I not go get her? You know, and I see a lot of my neighbors are going to get their kids, and I'm like, you know, I'm not going to go get her. I don't want her to think that being in school is not safe. You know, I want her to think that she's safe in her school. If I go get her, you know, then she's not going to ever feel safe there. And so I waited, and I called the school, and they said, no, they're fine. You know, they're in the classroom. They don't know what's going on, but we're not going to start the nursery school today. So now what we see is smoke. Like if you look at a map, we're nowhere near like the World Trade Center. I mean, we're in South Brooklyn, but the smoke is coming down at Marine Park, and like gagging from the smoke, and this paper is falling all over the street, and like prospectuses, you know, financial papers with burnt edges, and like, oh my God, like, you know, you just walking around horrified, you know, and you don't know what you don't know what to think. And I'm still not worried about him, because I guess growing up as a child of a fireman, you don't worry as much, as crazy as it sounds, because that was what your dad did. So they went to work every day. Now your husband does it. You're less worried. So I got in the car and I drove to get her. I said, I'm going to go get her. And they, as I'm driving past the actual Marine Park, 1010 wind says that the first tower fell. And I having worked in number one for so many years, for Dean Witter, I was like, I just couldn't believe that had happened. So I got to her school, and they brought her out, and she looked at me and she said, Mommy, do I have head lice too? And I was like, what do you mean, Kim? What are you talking about? And in her mind, the kids were all being taken out of the classroom because they had head lice. Because, you know, like usually that's what they do. Like kids get removed and they just don't come back. So she thought they were all being quarantined, because at that point when I went and got her, there was hardly anybody left, and I didn't even realize. She was left like in a classroom with like very little children. And we got home and got in the car, and by the time I'm passing the park again, the second tower had just fell. So literally in front of the same spot, both buildings fell. And I'll never forget where I was, in front of the actual Marine Park. So now in my mind, I'm saying, okay, it's now, he left here an hour and 10 minutes ago, from the first to the second tower falling. If it was midnight and he was in a Corvette, there's no way he would make it to the World Trade Center from here, under normal circumstances. You know what I mean? So in my mind, I knew he was safe. I just had to feel like that. I was like, he's safe, he's fine. He didn't make it there in time. There's no way he was there yet. But and I had no cell phone. He didn't have a cell phone. There was no way to call him. So now I'm home. We're all sitting outside, and you know, people are, you know, you gotta know where we lived is all firemen, cops, people who work there. Everybody's outside, people crying, you know, children running around and playing because they don't know what's going on. And just pure disbelief and panic, worry about family members and my brother, my sister. Everybody knows a fireman, everybody knows a cop, everybody knows somebody who works in a building. And the papers are still coming down. They're still raining on Marine Park, and the kids are picking them up and bringing them over to us. In fact, I still have a folder of them I had saved. And finally, at 3:00 in the afternoon, I had my cordless phone outside. My phone rings, and it's my mother-in-law. Now, my mother-in-law lived 130 miles north of us. And she's like, is Robert working? And I was like, he was home. And she couldn't leave her desk. It was horrible. So I reassured her that he was fine and he was going to be okay. And because she couldn't leave her desk until she heard. So because you couldn't get through, no one could get through on the phones. And it was, so the kids were playing. Like I said, we stayed outside all day. I don't think we went inside because there was nowhere to go because I had no kitchen. Like I had no, like nothing. And I did not have a kitchen until like December, because when you hire a fireman to do a job, like, you know, they were not coming back because they were going to be at the trade center for 4 months, you know, like looking for their brothers. They were not coming back to my house. So finally, I'd say around 4, I don't know when number 7 went down, but 7 had just fell. And he found his way to the postal building that's right there. And he picked up a phone, he called me, and he said, I just want to let you know I'm okay. And I said, I knew you were. I just knew you were fine. And he got like mad. he's like, what do you mean? You know, I was like, I just knew in my head you weren't there when those buildings went down. I just knew it. And I didn't know his whole company was gone. He was covering 26 Engine that day, and he had just gotten promoted, and the captain who was covering his tour, Captain Freno, perished. And it was my husband's tour because he had taken off that day. He had not taken off. The job is mutuals, and you either do the first or second half, and he was doing the second half. And so he was the sole surviving officer in the company. And he didn't come home till the next day. But the rest of that day, he was at the firehouse, and they went back at midnight and got the fire truck, which was buried. The only one left was the chauffeur, and they got it, which was probably the reason why he succumbed to throat cancer, because he got into that cab with all that asbestos, and it wasn't cleaned for months afterwards. They didn't come back and clean that cab for months. And he drove around in that cab, you know, daily, 26 Engine, because it wasn't destroyed in the collapse, but it was never cleaned. So he had to take care of all the widows and everything. So basically, you know, he didn't get back to the next day, which is September 12th. He came off the bus. He took the bus home. And I'm sitting on the stoop again, being outside with the kids. And he came off the bus, and his eyes were as pink, the brightest pink you could see. The white of his eyes was so pink. And he was just a zombie. Like he just had no emotion. Like there was no emotion. And my neighbor came out, and he was having trouble breathing, and she gave him her CPAP machine that she uses for her daughter's asthma. And she did a treatment with him. And he showered, got dressed, and he left and went back. And pretty much we were on our own for a month, at least, with, you know, 4 small children in a house with no kitchen, no floors, and you felt terrible. You know, you couldn't say anything because of what was going on. But I finally went around to a neighbor in October, who was a general contractor, and I said, I just sat on his couch and I cried, and I said, I need help. Can you give me a sink? Something, anything. You know, I have 3 babies, and I'm washing bottles in a tub. And he stopped the job he was doing. He came, he set up a makeshift kitchen for me so that we could at least function as a family. And then by that time, you got to picture this little small house. We got our cabinets delivered. So not only do I have no kitchen, but I have boxes upon boxes of these tall cabinets and babies crawling on wood floors. It was, and you couldn't say anything because these guys were just going through so much. And it was so horrible. And the kids, you tried not to watch the news, but that's all you did. And one of my twins, Robert, he would say to me, Mommy, put on your show. I want to watch your show. And he was talking about the news. He wanted to watch like the 9/11 news. He got like so involved in it. And he was only 3, not even 4 yet. But he wanted to watch Mommy, put on your show. And so you realize, oh my God, I'm watching too much of it. I got to turn that off because the kids are starting to see it, and so, I mean, that's it. That was our story. It was nothing exciting, but it was, we lost her school, lost several fathers, very famous one, Timmy Stackpole. His children went to her school. A lot of children whose parents worked there never came home. So it was, Marine Park was definitely affected. And that's about it. I mean, it was, you never forget the smells that day that came. And if you look at the map of, the satellite map of that day, you could see the smoke went right over Marine Park. You can see it goes right down to South Brooklyn. That's where the winds were going that day. And the smell, and I can't even imagine the smell that they smelled down there. So, I mean, that's it.
Kim, you were 8 at the time?
Yeah, I was 8. So my story is a little bit shorter. So I remember being in school and the principal had said, we're not going to go outside for recess today. And I remember thinking to myself, it's such a nice day out. Why aren't we going outside? My teacher said, oh, they're doing construction outside. And kids don't pay attention to that stuff. So we were all in our classroom. And one by one, kids were just like leaving and nobody understood why. And you could tell the teacher was like crying, like her eyes were like red. I remember that, like her face was red and it looked like she was like hiding something. So I'm not sure how the rumor started, but people were saying kids were getting pulled out for head lice. So I was actually happy that I was still in school because I didn't want head lice. Meanwhile, everybody in my class, I think it was me and 2 other kids maybe left in the class, at least that I was sitting with at lunch when my mom came and got me. And I remember walking up the stairs and with the teacher and going to get my stuff. And I remember seeing my mom crying in the hallway. And I'm like, Mom, I'm so sorry. Like, I'm sorry I have head lice. Like, I had no idea. And then we went out to the car and she explained everything that had happened to me and happened to my dad and like what was going on in the world. And I was just, I really don't remember how I interpreted it. I just remember like feeling a little sad. And we went home and I saw on the news, I guess it was left on, I saw them replaying the plane going into the tower. And I remember my mom like shutting it off right away after I saw it. And I don't really think I thought much of it. I didn't think anything was going to happen. Like when you're a kid, your thoughts are extremely different than when you're an adult. So I remember going out and playing with my friends, and outside it was like black smoke everywhere. And I was like, what's going on? I remember the smell. Me and a bunch of kids were on the block playing, and we were looking at the papers falling from the sky, and we actually like made it a game to like go and collect them. And we were just like collecting them in the streets. And there was this kid who lives around the corner from me, and he found like a check for like $5,000. And he thought he was like rich because we were kids and we had no idea. This kid thought he had $5,000. Meanwhile, it was obviously a business check that had already been signed, but it was like almost a full check, but it had like burnt edges. And I remember smelling like everything that we picked up, and it smelled like a fire. So it was like pretty interesting. I remember collecting them all, and people were like, oh, I got more than you. Like it became a game. It was very strange to think about it now. I moved upstate when I was 10. And I remember a lot of people talking about their experiences on 9/11, and they're not that anyone's experience is better or worse than anybody's, but like they really truly didn't understand what happened that day. Like everyone was in their own little worlds upstate, like opposed to where I was. It was like you were in it without actually being there. So it was definitely something I'll always remember, even though it's a little bit, it's not really a lot. I mean, I'm glad I don't remember everything, but that's pretty much what I have. That's pretty much it. I'm sorry.
She wouldn't let her dad leave for work several weeks. She was very upset because she knew he was going into Manhattan, and it was very traumatic for her. She wouldn't let her father leave for work, and when he did leave for work, she was upset, and she did not have a very good teacher who was very empathetic, and she was having a lot of anxiety and trouble, and she would write with like a Sharpie in her book, incomplete. So my husband took like a giant black Sharpie and pretty much wrote "F-U" on the thing and sent it back. And she really had a hard time. And then when we moved upstate, part of the 5th grade is the 9/11 project, and they had no idea that she was in the classroom. So I went up and brought all this stuff that she had from her dad, including the papers, and she went up to present to her classroom, and she couldn't present. She ran out of the room crying. And then I'm standing there with all this stuff, and the teacher said, I had no idea I had a student here that was affected. Like, he just thought he had a bunch of upstate kids who really had no way, and
he was a substitute teacher who, it was like his 3rd day working. I felt so bad for him.
And here she had twisted glass from the World Trade Center. She had dust from the World Trade Center. She had papers. And now Kim runs out of the class, and every kid's eyes are like looking at me, because now they're like, normally they not listening. Now they're all like listening. And I presented a project for her. And she was really affected by it. She doesn't remember, but it was very traumatic for her. She was 8, they're not babies, but they're not old enough to understand. But she knows her dad's going in there to the city every day, and she knows fireman died. So she don't want him to go. Don't go. Don't go. I have to go. Well, don't, and it was very hard for her.
Patty, you've told me that your husband was really never the same after 9/11. Kim, did you notice that as an 8-year-old? What did you notice?
Well, my dad had a good way of camouflaging his feelings around his kids, because I didn't really notice much of a difference, other than the fact that he wasn't around as much, in the sense of he was always going to fireman events. And I didn't notice that he was sad, but I just figured, it was because he lost friends. But not that I can remember.
And how soon did he start getting sick?
Oh, he got sick. Well, we found out about the cancer. It was a couple days after my 17th or 16th.
He was diagnosed on April 3rd. He died on May 2nd.
Yeah, and they didn't tell me until the day after my birthday, because I don't think they wanted to make me sad on my birthday. But it was pretty quick.
He had curable cancer, so it was basically that he died from the results of the surgery. His body reacted by sending serous fluids to his lungs and gave him pneumonia, because they removed 2/3 of his one lung from the, he had a intestinal tumor in his airway. You don't get intestinal tumors in your airway. He got one. So they removed 2/3 of his lung, and in the removal, his body reacted. The carcinoid tumor, your body sometimes feeds off carcinoid tumors. So when they removed it, it flooded with fluids and gave him pneumonia. And they had to put him on a respirator, and then his organs started shutting down, and his kidneys, and eventually his heart. So he had surgery on the 23rd, and he died on May 2nd.
I'm so sorry. The 9/11 cancers are not your typical cancers. They're cancers on steroids, and there are cancers that the experts have never seen before. And I've talked to so many people. At the first diagnosis, it's stage 4. At the first symptom, it's stage 4. It's horrifying, and it's not ending. close to 20
No.
years later, we're talking and.
No, and in my mind, because he was the sole surviving officer, he was down there a lot, but he was not able to, and because I had 4 children and I had to work, okay, I had to go to work. So he wasn't one of those guys who was down on the pile on every tour off. He couldn't be. We had to pay our mortgage, so I had to go to work. He had to be home with his kids. In my mind, it came from that cab. And also they did lower him into the hole. And then he was walking around the shops underneath. And so in my mind, that's when it happened, in one of those two, because he wasn't there other than that first day, which he was there that whole day, the first 48 hours. But afterwards, like, you have so many guys that spent so much time there. He couldn't. He would have been, trust me, but we had to pay our bills and I had to go to work. So someone had to be home with our 4 children. So in my mind, it was from that cab that he went back and got his rig and he brought it back to 26 engine, and it was not decontaminated for months. And his chauffeur is out on 3/4 and he has severe World Trade Center cough, severe issues. So I know for a fact that it was that cab they drove around in. So, and you know what, he would have never not done everything exactly the way he did it. So I can't, this was his job and it's what he did and it's what he loved doing. And he would have gone, knowing everything that happened to him, he would do it again, because that's what he did.